Today I'm reviewing the new JOOLA Gen 3 paddles. Pickleball is constantly evolving as a sport and equipment has played a role in its evolution. However, I'm willing to bet that no paddle will have a bigger impact on the game than these paddles will right here. Whether for better or for worse, these paddles are poised to make the game faster, so let's get into it. Hey, this is Braden with Pickleball Effect. In this series, there are a total of 8 paddles, which is a lot. To provide a concise review, I'm going to approach this one differently than I have from previous reviews. Instead of diving deeply into each individual paddle, I will share my overall impressions of the series as a whole, and then I'll briefly touch on the different shape options, compare it to the Gearbox Pro Power paddles, and conclude with my thoughts on the potential impact of these paddles on the game, as well as share my recommendation. If you want more detailed information about the specific performance on any one of these paddles, then head over to my website to check out my written review. I'll put a link to it in the description. I was fortunate enough to attend JOOLA's pre-release launch event for these paddles last month, so I've had these models in my bag for a while and have been extensively testing them ever since. If you decide you want to buy one of these and you thought this review was helpful, then please use the links in the description to purchase it and help support my channel. Alright, so let's start with my impressions of the series as a whole. Like I alluded to earlier, these paddles are power paddles. We're talking Gearbox level power, which is the most power you're going to find anywhere. Every shape and thickness option in this series is a power paddle. But the power on these is different. It's more exponential than linear. With most paddles, if you put 2 times the effort into your swing, then you're going to get 2 times the power in return. But with these, if you put 2 times the effort, then you get 3 times the power back. That math isn't exact, but you get the idea. I think the paddles are this way because of the technology JOOLA is using. It's different tech than what we've seen anywhere else. What they did is add an additional layer of foam around the head of the paddle that sort of acts like a trampoline, which is where this big power is coming from. JOOLA calls it their propulsion core. This different access to power rewards big hitters the most. But if you're someone who can't generate their own power, you will still get more power with these versus other paddles, but you may not get that big power that you're expecting based on my description above, which is just something to be aware of. The feel of these paddles is different too. It doesn't feel like your traditional soft, plush, or stiff feeling paddle. It's more of a firm and hollow feeling, and it's a bit tricky to describe. Because it's unfamiliar, it takes a couple of sessions to adjust to. After some time, the 16mm options started to feel pretty good, but the 14s have a pretty harsh feeling to them at impact that I wasn't crazy about, but wasn't necessarily against either. I liked the feedback they offered, but it wasn't a pleasant feel at impact. As you can imagine, the bigger power and trampoline effect of the paddles do make them harder to control. The first time I got these, I went and played some games straight away and was just spraying stuff everywhere. It wasn't until after I put in a couple drill sessions with them that I started to dial them in. I got to a decent place with my soft game, though even after playing with them for 3 weeks, I just wasn't completely confident in my soft game because I was still occasionally popping things up here and there more than I'd like. The best way I can describe it is it's like playing with the wind behind your back the whole time. If you've ever played in those conditions, then you know you have to shorten your swing and take a little something off to keep the ball down and in play, but then you have those chances to attack, the wind comes in super handy. Ultimately, these paddles put more pressure on my opponents with my serves, returns, drives, counters, and volleys, which then sets up more offense and opportunities to win points. The drawbacks being it's more difficult to keep the ball down when you need to, and hitting a variety of attacks that require more finesse is more difficult. There's definitely some give and take, but if you can manage the power and be soft with it when you need to, then there are a lot of benefits to having these in your hands. The big question you have to ask yourself and figure out with these is if the added offense makes up and exceeds what you lose in the soft game. Talking about the sweet spot size, all the models play at the forgiveness level you'd expect for its shape and thickness, which is a good thing, especially for power type paddles like this. JOOLA's Gen 2 paddles weren't known for being the most forgiving paddles, and these are definitely better than their Gen 2 paddles in that department. When I made mistakes with the paddles, particularly with the 16mm options, it was because I left the ball up and not because of the small sweet spot. Lastly, I'll mention that the spin level was better than past generation JOOLA paddles, though the grit on the paddles was inconsistent. Some were extremely gritty and others were just normal gritty, but in general they were better than past models from JOOLA, and I'll also say that the paddles were louder than most others, particularly the 14mm options, which is just something to be aware of. Okay, so let's briefly cover the different shape options you have to pick from, and I'll share my favorites. So JOOLA offers these paddles in 3 different elongated shapes and 1 standard shape. Their elongated options include the Ben Johns Perseus 3, the Tyson McGuffin Magnus 3, and the Simone Jardim Hyperion 3. All of these options are 16.5 inches long and 7.5 inches wide. The only difference between the Perseus and the Magnus is the handle length. The Perseus handle length is 5.5 inches long while the Magnus is only 5 inches long. Then the Hyperion 3 has a 5.5 inch long handle with a curved top. The Perseus has the highest swing weight of the three with a range of about 119 to 123, while the Magnus and Hyperion options both have swing weights below 120. If you want an elongated shape but are worried about the weight, then I'd go with either the Magnus or the Hyperion, and choosing between those two primarily comes down to the handle length preference. Then go with the Perseus if you're okay with a little extra weight because it plays a little more forgivingly and just plows through the ball a little bit better and gives you more power. All three of these paddles come in either 16mm or 14mm option. The 16mm options had the more pleasant feel and were more forgiving, but they were also more powerful and poppier than their 14mm counterparts, so I was a bit more consistent with the 14mm options. However, I think the trade-off of the better feel and more forgiveness outweighs the benefits of the 14mm in this case, but if you're already accustomed to 14mm paddles, then don't shy away from these. They're pretty much what you expect from 14mm paddles in general. Then they have their standard shaped Scorpius option that's shorter and wider at 16 inches long and 8 inches wide, paired with the 5.25 inch handle length. These options were my personal favorites. The power on these is still super good, but toned down just a hair, which made them easier to control. Plus the sweet spots are bigger, which never hurts. Then the cherry on top is that they are light and fast with swing weights below 112. The one drawback is that you do give up some reach. The 14mm in the Scorpius shape is more player friendly and forgiving than the 14mm options in the elongated shapes, which makes it more accessible for fans of 14mm paddles. If you're looking for a light paddle that packs a punch, then these are good options. Alright, let's compare these to the Gearbox Pro Power paddles. The Gearbox paddles were the first to achieve this tier of power, but the JOOLAs have a couple of advantages over the Gearboxes. One, they are offered in multiple shapes and thickness options, so you can pick the shape that fits your needs, whereas the Gearbox only comes in 2 shape options and only 1 thickness. And then 2, the JOOLAs are all more forgiving than the Gearbox paddles, which is a big deal. With the Gearbox, I could pop up a ball or make an error by missing the sweet spot, but with the JOOLAs, you just need to manage the power since the sweet spot sizes are bigger and the paddles are more stable. However, I did prefer the feel of the Gearbox paddles at impact. It has a softer, more pleasant feel to it compared to the harsher, hollow feel of the JOOLAs. Now I want to spend a second sharing my thoughts on how I think these paddles will change up the game. Because these are so powerful and JOOLA has such big reach, these are going to end up in a lot of people's hands, and I think it's going to change up the game a bit. People will be attacking more often and earlier. The 2 skills players will need to develop as the game gets faster are their volleys and letting the ball go. Players need to be able to handle the big drives and speed ups. If you can't block and redirect those attacks downwards or into space, then you're going to be in trouble. And second, you need to be able to let the ball go by and out of bounds when they are hitting it too hard. This is a learned skill and will calm your opponents down once they see a few go long and they learn that they can't just hit everything as hard as they want all the time. These are 2 skills I'm going to practice and prioritize for the next while, and I think it'd be a good idea for you to do the same. Alright, so I'll finish here with my recommendation. These are big power paddles and aren't for everyone. Though the power is fun, and I know a lot of people who will probably just get one anyway because they are new and the power is addicting. There's nothing wrong with that, and I will admit I really enjoy playing with these and experimenting with what I can do with them. However, you don't have to have this level of power to win games, so don't feel like you have to drop everything and adjust to this new style of power. But if you do like to play fast, can hit hard, want the latest and greatest tech, or think you can manage the extra power, then there are a lot of benefits to these paddles. If you have more of an all-court style of play and like to win points in a variety of ways, then these paddles probably aren't going to be the best fit. So there you go, that's my review and I hope it helped.